Hi, friends. I am Dorie Clark here for Newsweek with Laura Vanderkam. Laura Vanderkam is a productivity expert. She's the author of the book, The New Corner Office, as well as multiple other fantastic books, including 168 Hours, I Know How She Does It, and What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, which everybody always wants to know. Laura, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to be here. And specifically, we are going to be talking today about basically, how to exist in the pandemic. As a productivity expert, you have, I think, a unique insight into working from home and all of the things that have really bedeviled many of us over the past 6 months as people have been figuring things out. This is something you've been doing for a while, writing about for a long time. And so I'm curious, your book, The New Corner Office, of course, the corner office in question is, I guess, probably your bedroom. So what have you learned about working from home in the past 6 months, or how has your thinking changed about all of these things?
Well, I think it's been fascinating to see how many people have come to realize that you can work from home. This is entirely new for many people, but it works. Like many businesses have continued to operate. They have not disappeared. Whereas in the past, people had told me things like, "Oh, well, remote work, that's an interesting idea, but it would never work for us." And it's like, well, those companies, they're still around. They haven't gone out of business, hopefully. So it turned out it could work. So that's great. On the other hand, there's been a lot of challenges with everyone working from home, newly doing so. Many people had not chosen to do so, whereas in the past it was more self-selecting. And of course, many people who have, for instance, caregiving responsibilities have had fewer supports around for allowing them to work productively, with many schools and daycares having been closed during the pandemic, hopefully slowly opening up back now. But that's made it challenging as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. So I'd actually love to just say hi to our live viewers. We are, of course, live streaming, and so please go ahead, type into the chat box who's here. What is on your mind? Where are you calling in from? We'd love to see who is joining us, so we can give you guys a shout out. So as that is chiming in, Laura, I wanted to actually ask you. I mean, one of the things that I think is honestly most fascinating about your story, you were not just a productivity expert. You were a productivity expert with 5 kids, young kids who are at home, either metaphorically at home because they have not gone off to college, or literally at home because many of them are not yet back in school. So how have you navigated this specifically as a mom of more kids than most Americans have these days?
Yes. Well, they have been literally at home a lot over the past 6 months, which has been a big change because, you sort of assume that the children are like 5 years old. They start going off to school, and that has a certain rhythm to the days. And all of a sudden in March, they were all here 24/7. My youngest two children are in childcare or preschool in person now. So that is nice. That has made the house a little bit more quiet. I still have the older three around. They are doing virtual school at the moment. So, you just build it into your day. My husband and I are both here. We've sort of tried to set them up to be as independent and self-directed as possible. The first few days of school were a little bit more challenging. I was doing a lot of Zoom tech support, but we've worked through, like, if this happens, then try this. And, I generally try to make sure that they do their own thing. And so I've, in the past few weeks, actually gotten more time back to work that has been quiet. So that has been kind of nice. But I know a lot of people are really struggling with this, and especially if you've got really young kids who are not back in childcare yet. I highly recommend you got to come up with some sort of schedule that makes your daily life doable. If you and your partner are both working from home, as much as possible, you need to cover for each other. Like, work out an actual schedule where you split the day. Like, these are my hours, these are your hours. The party who is in charge of the kids at any given time, their job is not just keeping the young kids safe. It is actually keeping their kids out of the other person's home office, right? So each person has certain number of hours per day that they know they can focus. Now, it's not going to be 8 hours probably. You probably do 5, maybe sometime 6, depending on how you split the day. But you can do a lot in 6 focused hours. I think a lot of employers would be very happy to get 6 focused hours from many employees at this point. So definitely, if that is an option for you as a family, you should look into doing that.
That's fantastic, Laura. Thank you very much for sharing that. I just want to give a shout out to some of the folks who are joining us here live. I see Jamie is here. Hi, Jamie. Maria from Moscow. Mohammed is here from New Jersey. Trisha from Quakertown, Pennsylvania. We have the Philippines in the house. Warsaw,
Wow.
Maryland, New York City, the Netherlands, Roanoke, Virginia. Fantastic. Wisconsin, Belgium. I love it. This is great. Northampton, Massachusetts. Perfect. So we actually have a question from Annette. You've been sharing some already, Laura, which is fantastic. But Annette wants to know, she says, I'm looking for tips for my colleagues working with kids at home. And thanks for being on the show. So you shared one, which I think is really powerful, that if you are the partner who is in charge of kids at that given moment, not just keeping them safe, it is about actually keeping them out of the other person's way, which is a crucial distinction. What other things, if you are the responsible party, what else do you need to know about how to coexist in a way that that will actually be helpful so that people can get things done?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, go outside. I mean, getting people out of the house is great. Just, I mean, kids need to burn off their energy right now. And I know that's been challenging in places where it hasn't necessarily been safe to go outside so much, but hopefully people are in situations where that is changing. We've done a lot of nature walks. There's been a lot of video games. I will give you that too. So we've certainly been, relaxing the screen time restrictions. This is, if there were ever a time where that was called for, I think this is it. But yeah, I mean, the thing that in the past, when I was giving people advice on working from home, sort of pre-COVID, sometimes people would be like, oh, well, can I save money on childcare by working from home? And my answer is always no. You cannot save money on childcare by working from home. I mean, maybe on the margins because you have less of a commute. So, you don't necessarily have to pay for the commuting hours that you would have been doing. But long term, you can't really be the adult in charge of your young children during the hours you intend to work. And so you've got to come up with some other solution to make it possible, whether that's swapping with your partner. If you have another relative who is in a similar situation, a sibling or cousin who also has young kids, maybe you could work out the same swapping schedule of each person doing 5 hours a day watching for each other. If there's a neighbor you could do. I would also say if it looks long-term, like kids are going to be home and not in school, preschool, daycare, as much, go on care.com or something else, see if you can hire somebody for a few hours a week who you feel comfortable with that has a similar philosophy for social distancing as well. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to spend money on that, but your ability to focus in your career is worth it. Like, there are so many long-term benefits of staying in the workforce and not inadvertently, pushing yourself out of it because of sort of short-term thinking. And I know many people, times are tight, but maybe there are other budget categories that you aren't spending money on right now. Like, you're not taking that big trip. Well, maybe that money can be earmarked for childcare so that you can, in fact, continue to focus. Because there are some pretty big consequences to deciding, like, okay, just can't work, have to take a step back and step out. Whereas just sort of figuring out a way to make daily life doable, even if it's challenging, will have huge payoffs down the road.
I think you actually raise a really important point here, Laura. I mean, some interesting work has been done on this question by Sylvia Ann Hewlett in the Center for Talent Innovation, and especially her book On-Ramps and Off-Ramps, talking about the fact that especially for many working women who take time off work to be with kids, they assume, oh, it'll be a year, it'll be 18 months. And this is even pre-COVID. Somehow it turns into 3 years, 5 years, because it gets incrementally harder to get back into the workforce, much harder oftentimes than people would have imagined.
Yeah, I think, you definitely Some employers are offering the option of scaling down for a while, and maybe people want to take a look at that. If it's a part-time option, quitting completely is often, maybe not the best solution. You can ramp back up from being part-time. That's often something that's far more doable than when you take time out, because then you have to completely restart. And, some people are very good about it. They're good about maintaining their networks. They, still go and have coffee with people every week, even if they're out of the workforce. They still go to the conferences every year. You see them reading the professional publications associated with their field, and that's awesome. A lot of people get really busy with caring for children or elderly or whatever they are doing when they're with their time out of the workforce, and of course, because it takes a lot of time, and so then they don't keep doing those things, and yes, it does become incrementally more harder. I wish it did not. I wish that wasn't the case. I certainly, if I were designing the world, that would not be true at all, but I don't. So there we go.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Laura. And I just want to give a shout out to some of the folks who are in the house here. We have Denver, we have Newport, Rhode Island, we have the Big Apple. This is great. Charlotte, North Carolina, and from Myanmar. So that's amazing.
Oh,
welcome.
wow.
Welcome.
Such an international audience. I love that about this.
Absolutely. Newsweek has some amazing fans and amazing readers. And so just as an opportunity here to mention, if you are not currently following Newsweek on LinkedIn, make sure that you click the follow button so that you are always notified about this. And of course, make sure, open a new window, follow me and follow Laura on LinkedIn so that you can stay in touch with all of what we are putting out there in the world and keeping you informed. But a great question came in. And by the way, guys, we want to make this very interactive. So feel free to type your questions into the chat box for Laura. We'd love to have them. But a great question came in from Heather, and I'll actually just add this here to the box here. What has worked for you with keeping your kids social and emotional based? I imagine it's probably much harder for kids to socialize with peers or things like that during COVID. How have you managed that during all of this, Laura?
Well, the upside of having 5 children is that I have a play group already made. So in that sense, like, my kids already have like a quarter of an elementary school class going on, just playing in the basement. So in that sense, there are upsides and downsides to large families in quarantine. One upside is that the children have been able to play with each other and entertain each other to a great degree. And so I've been happy to have that. I know a lot of other people who have maybe only children or 1 or 2 children have been relying a lot on FaceTime with friends, that you can, let them talk on the phone with relatives, doing a lot of Zoom calls with cousins. That it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. And I've, even letting children do, say, social video games that, you have them set up on the phone talking to a friend or through the chat box if your kids are old enough for that, and playing Minecraft together. That can feel like a play date, even though, you're not in the same place. I think the emotional part is hard. Obviously, kids are very disappointed about not having certain things that they were hoping to do. I know when certain of our camps were canceled this summer, there was a lot of unhappiness about that. I've, sort of had this moment of reckoning in March as it was clear that our schools were getting canceled, all the activities were getting canceled, birthday parties getting canceled, that I was like, my job here as a parent is to help the kids think of this time as being an adventure instead of one giant bummer. And I realize that it is a giant bummer, sort of objectively, but if we keep a certain mindset about it, what can we still do, even given this situation? What adventures can we still have? What can we do to make daily life still feel fun? Then that goes a long way toward the kids feeling that way too. Now, obviously, if you see a deeper problem, then definitely reach out for help. There are a lot of therapists who specialize in young people, particularly adolescents, who may be having a really tough time with not being around their friends. You can even do online psychological counseling services. So if you are worried about going to a waiting room or something, you don't even have to do that anymore. You can talk through Zoom with the therapist. So do not be reluctant to do that. And I would even recommend that if people think it might even ever be an issue, like to sort of figure out what your insurance will pay for and what options are available, so it's ready to go. So if you do have a crisis, you aren't trying to find something in a crisis.
Yeah, I think that's really useful and really powerful, Laura. Thank you very much. Just want to greet some new folks who've come in here. We have folks from Greece, folks from Copenhagen who are saying hello and are glad to be part of the conversation. So we are glad to have you. And just a reminder, if you are enjoying this conversation, please hit like and please hit share so that your friends and colleagues can discover the conversation as well. We are taking your questions with Laura Vanderkam, author of The New Corner Office. And so, Laura, I'm actually curious that you wrote a book which was actually kind of a surprise hit, a surprise bestseller a few years ago, and it was called "What the I think I have this right. What the most successful people do before breakfast." Can you, now that everyone is obsessed, now we're living at home, everyone's obsessed with breakfast. What do the most successful people do? We inquiring minds want to know. So please tell us.
Well, mornings are a great time for doing anything that is important to you that life has a way of crowding out. And so I had realized over the years, if I've been studying the schedules of successful people, and particularly people who are doing a lot both professionally and personally. So, the person who has the huge job but is also training for triathlons, or the huge job and is writing novels, big happy family, whatever. And I realized that they were often using those morning hours for doing whatever it is that might not have fit into the rest of their life. People tend to have more energy and discipline and focus in the morning. So that makes those early morning hours good for those important but not urgent things that we all know tend to get short shrift in our lives. You want to write that great American novel, you can tell yourself you will do it at night with the time you have left over. But we all know that you will get to the end of the day and you will have no energy for anything except hitting next in the Netflix queue. So you might want to look for a different time. And for most people, the time is in the morning before, people want a piece of you, both at work and at home. I know it's hard to get up in the morning. I don't particularly like getting up early myself. I write about this and people are like, oh, so you must be up at 5 a.m. I'm like, I'm not voluntarily. I will tell you that. But that said, in many cases, people who think they are not morning people think that because they are tired in the morning. But that is a different matter. That's a function of how much sleep you need and when you went to bed, which is basically just a mathematical question, right? Like if you need 8 hours of sleep and you go to bed at 11 and you set your alarm for 6, you are going to be tired. Like you need to rework that, right? And make sure that the amount of time you are in bed and the time you're waking up corresponds to your bedtime the night before. And then you can do great things.
That is very sage advice, Laura. I love that. And we have Annette just giving you a +1 here. She says yes to the help from friends, family, and therapists for emotional stability. She's suggesting that employee assistance programs might be a good resource as well. So great point with that, Annette. And Juliana chimed in here. We have a really engaged audience. So please feel free, again, ask your questions to Laura and chime in with your own experiences. We'd love to hear them. Juliana says, my 16-year-old son was lamenting, i.e. Complaining loudly yesterday that he's learned that he's not that good at distance learning, but I helped him see it's a great thing he learned this now and doesn't have to do it when it's harder, like in college or adult life. So getting a sense apparently about where your strengths and your interests lie now. So that's a great point.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, a lot of people are learning, like, do they like working from home? Do they not like working from home? And granted, it's not a perfect setup of working from home. So, you might want to withhold judgment on that. But, now that you know, like how to do a Zoom call, like that's a skill, right? Like how do you have some sort of employee social event that's virtual? That's a skill. These are things that could be useful in the future. So it's kind of fun to view this as a resume building activity, even if the larger situation is not far from ideal.
Absolutely. And in fact, all of these things, we're building up new capabilities that we didn't even know we had or needed. And this entire COVID situation is just teaching us that things are constantly pivoting and we have to get used to it. For instance, I was lamenting, i.e. complaining loudly, before we hopped on, that I had so perfectly worked out the lighting in my condo and the sun somehow so rudely decided that now that it is getting into fall, the sun wanted to hit a different part of my condo at a different time. So I just, I really don't know what it's thinking, honestly, but I am adapting to that. So
Yes, that's true. For the larger things in the world that you cannot change, you have to figure out how to adapt ourselves. So until Dorie figures out how to move the sun, Dorie must move instead.
It's so true. It's so true. And speaking of the machinations of the sun, we had a question. Any suggestions for people working from home during the graveyard shift? If you have to work late and maybe you're trying to keep kids on a schedule, that can be kind of crazy. Do you have any thoughts about that, Laura?
Well, as much as possible, trying to remove your noise from the other people you are living with. If there's remotely any space you can go differently from the other people in your house, that's probably good. Having your noise canceling headset on if people are still awake is key. I have actually seen people go work in their parked cars in their driveway. Not ideal if it's really hot or really cold, but if it's a quiet place where nobody is going to disturb you, sometimes that is what it takes. And then you're still in your home, but you are, off there. And if your children are old enough to manage themselves, or they're with somebody else during that time, or they're asleep, that can work. You just come in every, hour or two to double check that everything's still going all right. And that could work.
That is absolutely true. I actually have a coaching client that is the father of a like a 1-year-old, and in almost every session he is doing a Zoom call, and he mounts it from the dashboard of his car. I'm like,
Yep.
oh hi, I know where you are.
It's quiet there. It probably isn't in his house, so he's doing what he has to do.
Absolutely, absolutely, that's right. So, Laura, a question that I had for you: you are the author of a couple of books. I mean, I think this is a theme that I Know How She Does It. One of the central themes, I would say, that you write about is the fact that people often say that they're busier or feel busier or claim that they're busier than they actually are. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's going on there?
Yeah, well, there's a certain currency to saying that you're busy, right? It means that the demand for your time is high. And, we're not going to say, like, guess what? I want you to know how important I am. But we will say, oh, I'm really, really busy, which is pretty much the equivalent, but in a nicer way, I guess. But, busy is relative. I mean, we could always find somebody who is busier than you. I once was working with a magazine to look at the schedules of a handful of people. And there was this one young lady who decided that she was an 11 out of 10 on the busyness scale because she had traveled internationally for work during the course of her week. I'm like, you know what? There's probably somebody who traveled internationally who has like newborn triplets too. So like, let's, I'm curious where the 11 out of 10 came from in this mindset. There's always somebody who has more going on than you do. But that said, busyness is a way we feel. It's often a way of saying, I don't feel like I'm devoting enough time to the things that I would really like to be devoting time to. And if that is the case, then time tracking is incredibly helpful. This is sort of the basis of all my work. Whenever I'm working with people writing books, I have people track their time for a week because you want to see the data right there, black and white, to know where the time is really going, because that allows you to make rational decisions. I mean, it turns out that maybe something you thought was a problem really isn't. Or maybe something you've never even considered is taking more time than you imagined. And so same as any business decision, you want to have good data. And the best way to get that data is to track your time for a week. And often when people do this, they find that they are not working as many hours as they may have thought. We have a tendency to remember our longest days as typical, which makes sense. It's a long day. You feel like, oh, it was really tiring. So it stands out in the brain. But people don't sort of add up the times that they started later or ended earlier or had a half a day off or something, or oh, that wasn't a typical week. Well, our decision of what is a typical week is more about how we like to see ourselves as opposed to what is actually happening in reality. We tend to underestimate how much free time we have, which again makes sense. We overestimate the things we don't want to do. We underestimate the things we do want to do. But when people say I have no free time whatsoever, what they often mean is I don't have as much free time as I want. But not as much as I want is a very different story from none. And ideally, when we see on a time log that it's more not as much as I want and not none, then you say, well, how can I scale it up? How can I make good choices within the free time that I do have in order to feel relaxed and feel rejuvenated and feel like life is good? And often there are options available. And so if we, consciously structure our time that way, then we do feel less busy and get more done.
Yeah, I think that's right on, Laura. And in fact, Darren says tracking your time can be a very sobering activity. That is so true, Darren.
Eye-opening.
Yes, and I have done this myself. I have followed your advice, Laura, and tracked my time. And it is a treasure trove of data to really understand. We have a kind of impressionistic understanding of what we're doing and how we're spending our time, but to actually see it written out, you can begin to see patterns in what you actually value versus what you say you value, and things like that. So I think I know the answer to this, but it's a technical question. What is your take here? Susanna wants to know, what are your favorite hour tracking or time tracking tools, Laura?
Well, I just use a spreadsheet. It's straight up Excel. It has got the days of the week across the top, Monday through Sunday, half-hour blocks down the left-hand side, 5 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. There's one on my website. You can go download it if you want, but trust me, it's just Excel. You could do this in like 5 minutes on your own as well. And I find this useful because then I can really see my days. And the 5 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. is sort of how we experience a day rather than doing midnight to midnight, which will look weird on the spreadsheet. And that's worked for me. I use just words to describe what I'm doing. It doesn't have to be perfect. I do slashes if I don't spend a whole half hour on something. So, work, comma, go make dinner, right? Or something like that. Other people like, actual time tracking apps. That's an option. There's free ones, like there's a free version of Toggle. Unfortunately, a lot of the market is more paid because it's repurposed billing software. So, you're billing your time to a different project, but the project happens to be watching TV or exercising or sleeping. So you might, use a free version first to then see if you need any sort of bells and whistles before you go into the paid market for it. But the one thing to keep in mind is that for an app to work, you have to have your phone with you all the time. And I don't generally think that the cause of time management is advanced by having your phone with you all the time. So it can work for a day or two. If you're going to track your time for a month or two, I might look into something else.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Laura. Thank you very much. And of course, as Laura mentioned, you can go to her website, lauravanderkam.com, and you can download her time tracking software there. And in fact, I used Laura's time tracking software, and I even wrote an article, about my experiences about time tracking. So it's very inspiring. So a question that actually came in, Laura, that I think is a good one from Gunjan. Gunjan wants to know, how do you keep personal time separate from work, considering that we are at home and tending to small kids? It can be overwhelming sometimes, which I think a lot of people agree with. How do you think about actually separating those things out as best we can?
Yeah, well, again, if you have very young children, trying to make sure that there is some other setup for watching them for at least some hours, because you will get more done in 2 focused hours of work and then go play with your kids for 2 hours than doing 4 hours trying to go back and forth. So, anything you can do to have someone else in charge of them for a little bit at least is going to be helpful. If it has to be movies, maybe even doing that. But I think what often happens when people are working from home is that it can be hard to set boundaries because you're still in your workplace. Like, there's no obvious end. When you commute to an office, like, you're going to commute home at some point. Like, you're not going to sleep there. So the day will end at some point. Where that's not the case when you're working from home. So a lot of people come up with some sort of ritual that lets them know that the day is done. Maybe it's as simple as writing your to-do list for tomorrow and then shutting down your computer. But it could be more involved. I mean, you could meditate, you could write in a journal, you can go for a walk, you can call your colleagues to say goodbye. But come up with some way to indicate that, okay, the day is over. Because now I have permission to relax. I've marched what I intend to march today. I am resting so I can march again tomorrow. So that even if you see your computer from the rest of your apartment or whatever, you're not feeling like, oh, I should be working now. There is a time for working, and now is not that time. We've had the ceremony, we have moved on, and that can give you mental permission to relax.
Yeah, super helpful, Laura. And some great comments coming in. Juliana says the continued emphasis on mindset is refreshing and helpful. And we had Annette saying, thank you for your recommendations today. You gave me a lot to consider. Your 11 out of 10 example of a busy person is a great way to consider editing energy vampires out of our lives. And their statement about the 11 out of 10 may be a vampire indication. Oh my goodness.
Ooh, coming into
Yeah.
Halloween here.
Exactly. We definitely have to watch out for that. That's great. So Laura, we are coming to the close of our half hour together. I wanted to ask you one last question before we part, and I'll just mention to all of our viewers here, if you all right. Again, if you're enjoying the conversation, please hit the like button. Please hit the share button, and feel free to comment. Let Laura know what tips have been most salient or most meaningful for you. What's your commitment for taking action? But Laura, along those lines, I will say for somebody that is out there and I don't know, feeling a little overwhelmed by the present circumstances, maybe they feel like they just don't have the best handle on their time management. They're feeling pretty stressed out. What are one or two sort of baby steps that someone who's already feeling pretty burned out might take to be able to regain a little bit of sense of control over how they are spending their time and their energy?
Yeah, well, I recommend planning your weeks on Fridays, taking a little bit of time on Friday afternoon to think about the upcoming week, look at what is already on your calendar, figure out what your top priorities are for the next week in three categories: career, relationships, self. Just 2 to 3 items in each. Look at the next week, see where those can go. See what logistics need to happen for those to be there. You can also look at your calendar and see, like, what do I want to get rid of or minimize, or can somebody else take on? And in a few minutes of studying your calendar on Fridays, looking to the next week, you could probably buy yourself hours. And when you continually do this, you have a spot in the week where you trust that you will take a step back and look at the whole big picture and what's going on and what you'd like to do with your time. It can start to feel better. And just one more thing is to put something fun every day. Like, we want a reason to get out of bed. Like, we want something that we are looking forward to. If you have something you're looking forward to in life just feels so much better. So put some little treat into every day, 5 minutes of something you really enjoy, and life will start to feel far more doable.
That's fantastic, Laura. Thank you so much. We have been talking with Laura Vanderkam. She's the author of The New Corner Office. You can learn more at lauravanderkam.com. I'm Dorie Clark. You can learn more and sign up for my newsletter so you can make sure that you continue hearing about these great weekly discussions that we do for Newsweek. It is every Thursday, 12 Eastern, 9 Pacific. And we have conversations with business thought leaders about how you can make your life better. Be sure to follow Newsweek on LinkedIn so you can stay part of the conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and a special thanks to Laura Vanderkam.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.